I'll start over. I want to welcome everybody to the August 10th meeting of the Retired Employees Association. I'm Dick Wilken, the president of the organization, and this is our general member meeting for August. Just a general reminder that we do record our meetings and our speakers, so don't say anything you don't want preserved forever, because it'll be placed on our YouTube channel. I want to welcome everybody again. We had a great meeting last month in July. We had a great presentation from a docent of the USS Midway Museum and gave us a lot of information, and we appreciate that. We've got a good speaker again for you today who will be introduced later on. I've been giving you, our general members, kind of real brief updates of Proposition B, the citizens initiative that passed back in 2012 that was finally overturned all the way up to the Supreme Court it took. And as you know, the city has been in the process of working to undo that. And it's now has been and will continue to be for a few more months in negotiations with the various unions. Because they have to negotiate how this is going to, how those people are going to be readmitted to the system. Don't want to know too much about it, except to say that it's going to be at least another couple of months before the negotiations are complete. One of the interesting issues that they're focusing on now is whether or not all of the thousands of people that were prevented from going back into the system, the pension system, will be forced into it, or will they have a choice to opt out if they would rather keep their 401k type thing. So that's the big issue. That's one of the big issues that's being negotiated at this point. And we will from time to time keep you updated as we learn more and more about it. But again, we're real happy to see that's being worked through, and that those members, most of them, if not all of them, will be joining our system as we go forward. I've told you in the past that we are been studying and are continuing to study when we might be able to come back to in-person meetings and events. And we are continuing to do that through our advocacy committee. I will say that we have for sure, we will not be meeting at Balboa Park either this month or in September, and we may even go longer because of the Delta variant that's underway now. But we'll keep you posted on that. The minutes of the July meeting are posted to our website, and this month we're actually also included in our newsletter. So you're certainly welcome to review those. Similarly, the treasurer's report, which we get from Karen Butler, our great treasurer, the board accepts those each month. And when we were meeting in person, we had copies available at the back of the room because we don't meet in person at this point. If you would like to see a copy of our monthly treasurer's report, just need to email Karen Butler, our treasurer. Her address is on our website, and she will send those to you. Okay. I'd like to again welcome all of you, and I'd like to ask Cynthia Queen, Director of Membership Services, and our great buddy, to give us a report on CSRS. Cynthia?
Thank you, Dick. It's so nice to see you all. Everybody's looking pretty good. Marianne looks like a beautiful sunset. But I'm just so glad to see you out there smiling. You do have a great speaker today. So first of all, I want to make sure that you all enjoyed your cost of living adjustment that was on your July SD-CSRS pension payment. I'm thankful to see some of you extra excited about that. I'm glad that happens. And I also just want to appreciate Jessica Maloney, who does such a great job with our communications. The communications on this seem to go well. It can be confusing when you have a different COLA for a few different people. And so I love the way we handled that this year with a chart to make it clear for people and utilizing all our technology, including the introductory message when people call our office. And I will be interested to see how many people's questions were answered by the introductory message. So we're trying to make things efficient. So I'm glad that all worked for you. Mike Bresnahan, I'm thinking you were going to send me a gift with your little bit extra because you were looking happy about that. So I'll be waiting on that. Appreciate you. No gifts, strict
No,
ethical
it's,
policy.
you'll get it.
You guys are so nice. Anyway, I'm so glad we could give you a cost of living adjustment. That is awesome. Now, the other thing I wanted to share with you, and I think you guys are the most in the know retirees out there, but I wanted to remind you that SDSER's offices are still closed. Seems like it's been a while, and I know you guys are trying really hard to get back to your in-person meetings, and I appreciate all that you're doing. But I just wanted to share with you that I miss seeing a whole bunch of people, and I'm glad I can see you. But we're still doing the same work every day, and it's kind of wild to think after all this time. We still conduct the same number of retirement counseling appointments every day. We do them via phone, and we use some cool technology, but still meeting with people every day and getting folks retired every single week. The health reimbursements and processing is all taken care of, and we still answer more than 100 phone calls and email requests each day. We do that with our entire staff. There's a small bunch of folks working in the office, generally less than 6 people. And but everybody else out there working, getting it done. And I think it's a bit harder this way. And we'd sure like to see everybody, but you know, just these times are what they are. But I wanted to remind you of that because you know, some folks aren't paying enough attention to these meetings. And we had a person just drop in from out of state wanting to drop off some paperwork on Monday. Now, of course, we located that person and assisted them, but I was like, well, that's a good reminder. I also had a member ask me if we were still closed because part of our population is obviously essential workers. We have police officers and firefighters and folks who are working every day. So it's interesting, you know, to kind of see how obviously things still go on, but then there's still these protocols that we need to take. And so we are still certainly following very strict protocols. As you know, or would imagine, the city has strict protocols and we have a lot to do to keep everyone safe. And obviously, many of us are vaccinated, but these darn breakthrough cases and this Delta variant. So we still do continue to have to monitor this and we still have issues. So I just want to emphasize that we are here to serve you all. I think things are going pretty well. I wish we could all just see each other and be together in person. But if anyone just sort of asks you, you know, what's going on? How do I get a hold of SDSERS? I would like for you to be sure to know, to tell them to either just call the office or look on our website. We are absolutely here to do everything we can. You just can't come down to our office and see us. But if you accidentally do, someone will take care of you. So we just really appreciate, this is a great forum for us to be able to communicate, and I appreciate all that we're able to share together. But I just find it interesting that here we are in August of 2021, and I think we'd all been, you know, pretty hopeful that this wouldn't be going on, but now, you know, it feels like we're just heading back into a fall. The fall, not a fall, it's all good. So I thank you again for all the work that you're doing and how you're all making it through with remote technology. And as we've seen, this has provided an opportunity for some of your members who are out of state or out of town to be able to take part in these meetings or even watch the recordings. And I know it wasn't going to be easy to record anything in the War Memorial Building. So I think this has presented some neat opportunities. So I just want to thank you, want to remind you that we really are here, you know, taking care of everybody all the time. I am here in the office today, but just twice a week. And if anybody has any questions, I'd be glad to answer them, but just kind of wanted to share with you that we're all in the slog with you together, getting through there, and just so glad to be able to see you today and to continue to serve you.
Does anybody have any, Jim, what do you got?
Oh, I was just waving goodbye.
Oh,
Oh, I'm not leaving just yet. But Jim, thank you for just mentioning that really quickly. I do want to say, because you know that I am your biggest fan and you have the extra coolest speaker today, my friend Charlie. But I wanted to let you know that I do have an urgent retiree issue that I need to attend to at 11:30. And so unfortunately, I'm going to have to step out for a little bit and I'm going to try to get back in time. But I would never leave without giving you the reason why. So thank you for listening to me today. And it's so nice to see you all. And as always, happy to answer any questions you all have later.
Cynthia, this is Mike.
Hi, Mike.
Hi. I know you're closed and you're going to be guided by CDC guidelines, but is the same true of the board meetings? Do you have any ETA on when you anticipate? We're struggling with this as a board as well. Do you have any
Thank you.
thoughts
I'm gonna,
about
Yeah, thank you. I'm going to turn it over to Greg to answer
Okay.
that. But I want to say thank you for asking that. And Mary Ann had reached out to Jessica and I saying, how are you all doing this? And the answer is it's complex. But I'll let Greg answer the question about how we're absolutely keeping our board going. Thank you, Greg.
And I wanted to ask Greg to make some comments anyway. I really appreciate Greg you being here, but maybe you could give us a few comments, including answering that question. Greg.
Absolutely. Well, thank you, Cynthia, and thank you for taking care of our members and juggling everything. And I appreciate you very much. And it is a pleasure to see everybody here, especially since one of my bosses is on the line with us, Charlie. Hi, Charlie. Good to see you. With regards to meeting in person, the governor has a special order that allows public retirement systems to meet remotely, and that is good through September 30th. So minimally, we're going to continue to meet remotely through September 30th, as long as that open meeting law has the exception. Personally, with everything that's going on with regards to the Delta variant, we've got the Lambda variant coming up. There's still a lot of unknown, and current regulations require 6-foot distancing. It's going to be very difficult for me to put Charlie and 12 other board members 6 feet apart into the boardroom. So I'm going to be attempting to do remote meetings, hopefully through the end of 2021. So that would be the November meeting also, and see how healthy the community is coming into 2022. But right now, September 30th is our deadline for remote meetings through SD-SERS.
Thank you, Greg. Is there anything else you wanted to add?
Heck yes. As you know, SD-SERS is dedicated to paying retirement benefits accurately and timely and taking care of the trust money. That is our mission. And I wanted to give you an update today on the trust money as of June 30th. And you may recall that June 30th is a very important date in the pension world. That is when we benchmark the value of the plan and give that to our actuary, and they check on the funding status of the plan. So we're always really interested in watching the markets on June 30th. And as of June 30th, 2021, our preliminary estimated portfolio return is 24.9%.
Oh, that's great.
Which is well above our 6.5% target. And this is really good news, because last year at the beginning of COVID, we were below our target. We weren't negative, but we were well below 6.5%. So last year was headwinds, and this year's tailwinds. So I'm glad that turned around for us. Also, as of June 30th, 2021, is the first time the portfolio has grown over $10 billion. So that is a nice milestone to have also. So the reason we did so well is the stock market was performing so well. The global stock market around the world was up over 42%, which was led by the US stock market, which was up over 46%. And they represent stocks, also known as public equities, represent nearly half of our investments. So really, when the stock market goes up, it looks like we're doing well, and the stock market goes down, it looks like we're not doing well. And also related to those public equities, we also had private equity investments, and they performed really well at about 46%. So both public and private equity really were leading the charge. But as you know, SD-SERS is a long-term investor with a diversified portfolio. And in addition to these risk-seeking assets to make us money, we also have about 22% in risk mitigating assets to help us protect on the downside, which we have in bond portfolios. And due to the low inflation, their returns were much lower this year, about 1%, but still adding some value, but giving us some diversity. So in summary, the trust fund is healthy, is very strong, and we will be paying your monthly benefits as promised.
Thank you, Greg. And boy, that 24% is awesome. So we congratulate you and your investment staff, your chief investment officer, and the consultants that I know are doing a great job. Thank you very much for all that you do. With that,
Looks like Mike has a question, Dick.
Okay, sorry, didn't see
Yeah,
it.
no, I do have a question. I'd like to go back to the COVID, if you don't mind, Greg.
Sure.
I know it's a controversial issue, but at some point in time, when you do start meetings with members, the issue of vaccinations of staff is going to come into place. Or internally, I would assume that you were doing some thinking through of making vaccinations mandatory. Can you comment on that as you feel comfortable commenting, please?
Oh, I love talking about that. So,
Okay, all right.
SD SERS follows the City of San Diego HR and personnel guidelines. And we follow them to the letter unless we absolutely can't to get our mission done to pay you benefits. But with this, we really are looking to the City of San Diego to provide us guidance, and appropriately so. The City of San Diego recently put out a directive that all employees must give notice, are they vaccinated, yes or no? They also gave notice that for unclassified employees, so those not represented by a union, must be vaccinated 10 weeks, at least 10 weeks after the FDA approves a vaccine. So right now they're all experimental, there's nothing approved, but as soon as the vaccine is approved, unrepresented employees have 10 weeks to get vaccinated to keep their job. So that is where kind of the city is leaning to. They're currently talking to their unions about these same types of requirements, but those talks are ongoing. So again, my goal with my team is, I said, we're going to continue remote working because we still just have to make sure that everybody stays healthy and safe. And so, which is why we could roll the dice and have members coming to our front counter. But again, I don't think that is fair to either the member or to the staff at this point. So we'll move forward as soon as practically possible when we can in a safe manner.
Thank you.
Anything else for Greg? Thanks again to Greg, and Cynthia, and Marcel, and your staff. You're doing a great job, so thank you. With that, I'd like to adjourn our business meeting and go to our speaker, and I'll go ahead and introduce him. You all know him. Our speaker this month is Charlie Hogquist, who is the elected retiree representative to the SERS board and has been for a number of years now. He's doing a great job, and we really appreciate him bringing the retiree perspective to those board discussions, and he does a great job with doing that. I don't know, we've had Charlie speak to us several times. He may not, this may be the first time, but just say a little bit more about him. He was with the San Diego Police Department since 1978. He actually retired as lieutenant in 2006. And then he worked as the police chief of San Diego Community College District, and then Palomar College's interim police chief in 2014. More recently, Charlie has had a great job. Probably a bunch of us are envious of his job because he's been a tour guide for San Diego Trolleys. And actually, I understand now he gets to do the SEAL tours, which means he gets to go out on the water and tool around. So everybody go down there and visit Charlie and get a tour. But Charlie is one of the things that he does on these tours is he's a great, he has an inquisitive mind, and he knows tons of stuff about San Diego's history and interesting stories. And he periodically brings some of those stories to us and to others on his tour. And we'd like to, again, welcome Charlie and have him bring us another story or two, if you would. So Charlie, take it away.
Well, thank you, everybody. And I apologize ahead of time. I'm in the process of moving, so I don't have any graphics for you. But the topic I'm going to talk about is infamous versus famous people in San Diego history. Now, famous, you know, is a person who everybody knows about and is important. But infamous is kind of interesting because in modern times, definition is basically somebody who is known for their bad deeds. But in historic times, the time and period that I'm going to talk about, you became infamous when you got convicted of a serious crime. And the two people that we're going to talk about were One of whom you all know when I say the name Wyatt Earp. Thinking of the shootout at the OK Corral comes right out. The other name I talk about is a man by the name of Cave Johnson Couts, who probably none of you have ever heard anything about. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about both of them, and then I'll let you decide which one of them is famous, which one of them is infamous. We'll start with Mr. Couts because he was older. Now, Couts was a very interesting character because he literally came from Tennessee, born in 1821, went to West Point. Kind of cool because one of his classmates was actually Ulysses S. Grant. He served honorably in the Mexican War. And at the end of the Mexican War, the United States brought it and was given all of that territory that became New Mexico, Arizona, and Southern California. Well, Couts was a very prolific writer, very good at details, could make good maps. So he was put in charge of an expedition that literally went from Monterrey, Mexico, all the way to Los Angeles. And he had to record all the data, everything he saw, draw pictures of the mountain. And literally the first report of all the new territories that were becoming part of the United States, he's the one who prepared those things. And all of those reports are sitting in the Library of Congress and they still refer to him. Now, he's stationed in Los Angeles and well, he kind of got into a little trouble, nothing major. His punishment was to be transferred to the cesspool of California, San Diego. So he gets transferred to San Diego, which at the time was a swamp. It was terrible. Nobody was here. And that's where the story kind of changes. Because during the Mexican War, believe it or not, San Diego was never conquered by the United States. They eventually surrendered. The battles that were fought here, the one by San Pasqual, the local Spaniards actually beat the Americans. And Fort Stockton up on Mission Hills was named after Admiral Stockton, who finally came with the relief force to open everything up after a treaty was negotiated. So it's kind of an interesting thing. So San Diego literally didn't have a lot going for it. But one of the things that people don't realize is not everybody who lived in San Diego was on the Spanish side. There were a couple who were secretly on the American side. And one of those was a famous guy. Some of us are old enough to remember when in Old Town, they used to have a restaurant called the Cafe dei Bandini. Well, Juan Bandini was a prominent citizen in Old Town, owned a lot of land. What people don't realize is he wasn't Spanish. He was Italian. He actually came to San Diego via Peru, and he was an American supporter. So when the American Army takes over San Diego, he is supporting the American Army. And that's where Couts' fortune changes. He now gets transferred to the cesspool of California, San Diego. And of course, they had to march through what is now the plaza at Old Town. And as they march through the plaza at Old Town, this is where the story takes a romantic turn. Which part is true, I don't know. One of which is as he's marching through, he catches the eye of a young lady. Her name is Isadora Bandini, Juan Bandini's daughter, and they fall in love. The other story says they met at a dance that took place at the Casa dei Bandini, and she actually tripped and fell and he caught her. But in either case, they got married. And here's the funny part. Couts didn't speak Spanish. Isadora didn't speak English. They got married. They had a wedding celebration that lasted a whole week in Old Town. Everybody was invited. When it was all over, they were married till Couts' death. They ended up having 10 children, 8 or 9 of whom lived to become adults. The history's a little murky on that, but that was his start. Now, what did he do for San Diego? Well, remember, here he is, an Army officer, an engineer, and a map maker. Well, if you go to Old Town San Diego today and you look at all the names of the streets, he named them. Juan Street is named after his father-in-law, Juan Bandini. So he named all the streets. He literally laid out the street pattern of Old Town, helped have the first sewer system built so it wasn't a swamp anymore. And while he was doing this, as a wedding present, he got a rancho up in the area of what's now San Luis Rey in San Diego. And he actually built that into the biggest and most profitable cattle ranch in Southern California. And he continued serving the city. What else did he do? Well, the town is lawless. So they needed a judge. Who's the first judge in town? Good old Cave Johnson Counts. During the time of the uprising of the Native Americans, we didn't have a militia or an army. He gets called back into service because he had left the army, is made a lieutenant colonel, and he organizes the militia that protects San Diego. He does all of these things, and member of the grand jury, prominent citizen, donates to charity. His wife started all sorts of charitable things. So these are all the things that Counts did. But I think the most interesting part is if you go to Old Town State Park now, or you go to any archives at the Huntington Museum up in Orange County, you want to learn about early Southern California, they have archives and archives because he was a meticulous letter writer and note maker. So half the exhibits in Old Town are all based on stuff that he wrote and records that he kept. Now I'm going to ask a silly question. How many of you have ever heard of Cave Johnson Counts and all those contributions to San Diego? And most people say no. The only memory of him is there's a little street, part of which is where Old Town Trolley is parked. That's called Couch Street, entrance to MCRD. That's named after him. That's his only formal memory in San Diego. Now, the famous person who came to San Diego was Wyatt Earp. Now, everybody knows of Wyatt Earp. He's famous because of the shootout at the OK Corral. But a couple of things about Wyatt Earp. People don't realize he started out his life as a crook. He had this thing about marrying prostitutes. In his life, he had 3 common law wives. The first one was a prostitute. The second one might have been, but when he left her for the third one, she committed suicide. And of course, his third wife was the person who afterwards spent her, after he died in 1929, spent the rest of her life cleaning up his reputation. You know, in other words, sanitizing it and changing things about it. Now, Wyatt Earp, of course, is famous for the shootout at the OK Corral. But was it really a shootout and a gun battle, or was it murder? Believe it or not, when it was over, 3 men were dead, and Wyatt Earp got charged with murder. So after the shootout, he had to get out of Arizona. So where did he come? California. So he comes here to San Diego, and literally people don't realize that he spent 3 years living here in San Diego. He bought all sorts of land, speculated it, and because he was a known gambler, he built 3 gambling halls. And if you go to downtown San Diego right now at the corner of 4th and Broadway, right across from Horton Park, Plaza Park, there's a pawn shop. That's where his most successful gambling joint was. And if you go down the street over where the Horton Grand Hotel is, that's where he used to live. Now, he settled there because that part of town was called back then and still is by the old timers. How many of you remember the term Stingeray? Well, Stingeray was that whole area between south of Island Street, between 3rd Avenue and 5th Avenue. Literally, there were more bars per square foot there than anywhere else. And the reason it got the nickname Stingeray was the sailors, because the port was there. And the sailors used to get ripped off by all the crooked gamblers and prostitutes. And their attitude was, we got stung on land faster than we did in the water by the stingrays. And that name Stingeray is still with us to this day. Now, Wyatt Earp profited from all of this stuff in gambling, his speculation, but he never really forgot his past. And what I say by that is his earliest arrest as a young man was for being a pimp, running a brothel. Well, he comes to San Diego and he's running the 3 gambling halls. So his wife needs an occupation. Her name was Josephine, but she went by Sadie. And all the newspaper accounts at the time said she's the most beautiful woman in the world, looked like Aphrodite. So what did they do? What did she do? She opened up the first dating service in San Diego. In other words, the biggest brothel in town. And that's how they made their fortune. They stayed here for about 3 years, made their money, and then eventually left, went to Alaska, came back, and Wyatt Earp eventually settled up in the LA area. And what's really interesting, there's a movie that they make, and Bruce Willis is in it with James Gardner, and talks about Wyatt Earp being a consultant to movie stars. He really was. He died in 1929 in Hollywood. Now, let's get back to Couts. Why don't we know anything about Couts? Well, I'm going to tell you right up front. Couts was pretty much a devoted family man, but he was mean, especially when he was drinking, and he drank a lot. Ended up making him die a very young man at age 53. Now, Couts had this really interesting thing. He was a very good businessman. His ranch up by Oceanside, San Luis Rey, was the most profitable cattle ranch in Southern California. But he also saw the writing on the wall that cattle wasn't going to be king. So he literally was the first rancher to diversify, started bringing in sheep and other animals to raise, and continued to grow very wealthy. And he also protected his land. The first thing that got him into trouble was, well, when he was drinking, he mistreated his workers. He was an part-time Indian agent up there because he was actually the first white man to settle northern San Diego County. When he got drunk, he kind of beat his workers, and he got arrested twice for that. His penalty for one of those, the sheriff beat the hell out of him and left him there. But what makes Couts the most famous or infamous is the famous shootout that took place right on San Diego Avenue. If you go by San Diego Avenue over by where Miguel's restaurant is, Couts shot a man in the back. The man's name was Juan Mendoza. Mendoza worked for Couts, and Couts fired him. Mendoza threatened Couts and said, "I'm going to kill you." Well, Couts actually believed the fear because Mendoza was one of the few people he was afraid of. He comes to town to do business. He sees Mendoza. And this is where the history gets interesting. One report says that he and Mendoza confront each other, and then a shootout occurs and Mendoza's dead. The other report says Mendoza saw Couts, turned around and walked away. Couts walked up behind him and shot him with 2 barrels of a shotgun. Killed him dead right on San Diego Avenue. Couts gets immediately arrested. He's in jail. This is a hanging offense, so everybody thinks this is the end of Cave Johnson Couts. Well, turns out he hires for his lawyer a prominent judge from Los Angeles. And this judge comes up with a very, very unique defense. And that defense was preemptive self-defense. I had to get him before he get me. And because Mendoza was such a bad person, the jury bought it and found him not guilty, and he walked away. Kind of an interesting little thing. It's kind of funny because we actually passed a law that if you go to law school in California, they still study in criminal law, this rule, because the legislature had to pass a law to say you can't use that defense anymore. That's how unique it was. And he set precedent again for the law in California. So again, he's got law for him and all this other stuff. So, but we don't know him because we think of him as a mass murderer. In his life, we know he killed about 5 people. So did Wyatt Earp. Now, Wyatt Earp had a couple of good traits. Everybody thinks of Wyatt Earp as a gunslinger, but you know, he wasn't. Yes, he was a lawman in some of the toughest towns in the West, helped tame him. But Wyatt Earp had a really interesting technique. When he had to face a gunfighter, he didn't have a shootout with him. He got in close and would literally fight with the guy with his fist because he considered all those gunfighters to be cowards. And by confronting them and bringing them in without shooting them and disarming them, he embarrassed the hell out of them. And that's how we ran him out of town. It's one of the things that added to Wyatt Earp's legend. One of the things that made Wyatt very, very famous in his life. Plus the fact that a dime store novelist from the East Coast started writing books all about Wyatt Earp. So we all heard about him and Bat Masterson. Couts, on the other hand, things started going bad for him after the Mendoza incident. He started drinking very heavily, started spending more time away from the ranch. Business started to fall off. So eventually he ended up dying because he drank himself to death. His wife ran the ranch for a while, and then his son took it over, Cave Johnson Jr., both of whom are buried here in San Diego, and they're still Couts family members in town. Now that whole big ranch that he owned up there in San Luis Rey, the state of California bought about 30 years ago, and it's now a state park. So his legacy, again, still lives on. But How many people know anything about Cave Johnson Counts? So what do you think? Which one of them is really infamous? Counts or Wyatt Earp? Which one of them contributed to make San Diego what it is today? Counts or Wyatt Earp? Who is an entrepreneur who just came here to make some money and left when he made his cash? Who stayed here till he died and has a legacy that still lives on today. And it's one of those ironies of our history that people will go through Old Town, learn all about this stuff in San Diego, and not realize it all comes from the records of a man who lived here and recorded it all. But I think the most remarkable thing was Couts, like I said, was not a nice person. He was a mean drunk. But when you think about the contributions he made to San Diego, the fact that he and his wife helped make the community better, we should at least remember him for what he did, as opposed to somebody like Wyatt Earp, who came here for about 3 years, really didn't live his mark. But you can go right now downtown to the gas lamp, and every walking tour of the gas lamp area will show you his gambling halls, where he lived, the house he owned, and all the properties that he bought and sold and made a profit of. But yet, we don't know too much about Cave Johnson Counts, because again, he was probably the first mass murderer in history. But I guess people still are a little upset about the fact that he got off on the technicality. Okay, but then again, so did Wyatt Earp. All right, that's, like I said, just a brief little summary about that. But one of the things I do want to ask people is think about San Diego history and how many little events have occurred and behind the scenes with people like the Couts of the world. Like, you really know about what he did. Just like there's another great person. If you go to Old Town, go to El Campo Santo, and there is a burial plot there to a man by the name of Gada. Gada actually was a chief of the local tribe, one of the native tribes, and actually led a armed insurrection against the United States. He was arrested, and they decided that this was war, so they were going to give him a military court-martial. So they needed a judge who knew something about military law. So what did they do? They drafted Couts back into the army to make him the judge of this trial. When Gara was sentenced or found guilty by the trial, Couts literally said, "I don't have any choice. This is treason, and the only penalty is death. We got to shoot you, but I don't really think this is right, but that's what we're going to do." And Gara was actually executed right there in Old Town. And what's kind of interesting is to this day, the Gara family doesn't really talk to the Couts family. So folks, if anybody has any questions, like I said, I just wanted to give you something a little bit humorous, talk a little bit about San Diego history, and have you guys decide, who do you think was the famous person? Who do you think was infamous? Who contributed to San Diego? Who didn't? Because everything isn't always as it seems.
Thank you, Charlie. That was great. If you have a question, just raise your hand and then we'll unmute you. Can't see okay, Mike has a question.
Yeah, fascinating, Charlie. I missed it. When did well, first of all, Couts, is that spelled, is C-O-U-T-S?
That is correct.
Because I live up by Presidio Park.
Correct.
And there is a Couts Street. Is that named after?
Yes.
him?
What happens is literally Couts Street runs from up there in the Presidio area all the way down to Pacific Highway. But when they built the train and the highway, they separated the road. So there's two sections of it now.
So when did he pass away? And does he have any, is there a Couts family left in San Diego?
He still has children here. He passed away in, I believe it was like 1873. He was 53 years old. He still has children here. When the state of California bought his rancho 20 years ago, the money went to his 3 grandchildren, and his son, Cave Johnson Jr., was also kind of a rake. He had 3 kids with his maid, who never married her, but he gave him his name, and the state of California has recognized him. So if you go up in the area around San Luis Rey, you will see there's quite a few folks up there named Couts. We actually have a couple who live right there in the Mission Hills area too. And they're all his great-great-grandchildren.
Thank you.
Who else? I have one, Charlie, which is how in the heck do you get all this information?
Well, being a policeman, you always want to find out what things happen. And I always, when I see something and I don't understand what it is, when I moved to San Diego from New York, I wanted to know why the city of La Mesa was called La Mesa and El Cajon was El Cajon, because I knew no Spanish. And I found out that La Mesa was because it was the tabletop over the valley of El Cajon, which was the valley. So I always put things together, but my brain works a little strange because I can get things from different places, different time periods. And my brain like puts the connection together when they overlap. So it's kind of a funny thing. And that's what I do now. It's like every day I try to learn something new and figure out how it fits in the great scheme of things, or in my case, the little scheme of things, like doing a tour in San Diego Bay.
That's fascinating. Like, for example, where did you get the information on Wyatt Earp that is so contrary to the myth of Wyatt Earp?
Read a couple of books, the biographies and other stuff, and actually the Gaslamp Historic Society, because they want to promote the tours, actually have a little page and a summary on them. And some of the stuff, it's kind of interesting because Sadie, his last wife, after Wyatt died, literally went on a campaign to every bad story about it, even if it was true, to correct the history in her mind. In other words, not so much to whitewash it, but to rewrite it. And it was one of those things that it was fascinating to read about what she did to preserve her husband's memory in the future. Just like in that movie where they have Wyatt Earp, advising people on the television, on the movie sets, they have it that he was with, I think, Tom Mix. But you know who he actually mentored when he was a young actor just before he died? A guy by the name of Marion Morrison, better known as
John Wayne.
Yeah, that's great.
And all of that stuff is documented. Like I said, if you read the excerpts, and a lot of it is just like reading the newspapers. I've actually, when I researched Cave Johnson Counts, people don't realize that the most famous place in Old Town, of course, is the Whaley House, the haunted house. And one of the reasons the Whaley House is haunted is Thomas Whaley's daughter committed suicide there. What people don't realize is she committed suicide because she was engaged to Counts' son, who dumped her because she was crazy.
Oh,
So you see, all of those things are related. So when you dig into them, you find these little pieces, and when you put them together, it makes the puzzle even more fun.
well, that's fabulous. Okay, I'm looking for some hands here. Greg.
Yeah, Charlie, here, since you like putting pieces together, I've got a couple memories when I was a young lad about the name Bandini.
Yes.
And you had mentioned the Bandini family. So when I was a young lad driving a forklift for a living, they had big pallets of fertilizer. And later when I was in college driving a delivery truck around LA, there was a Bandini fertilizer plant, Bandini Mountain. I was wondering if that was connected to the Bandini Ranch.
Yes, it was, because you got to remember, Bandini, like I said, was Italian from Peru in Old Town, but his son-in-law was a guy by the name of Abel Stearns. Abel Stearns is the one who gave the rancho to Counts and Isadora. And remember, back in those days, in the 1850s and 60s, all the land grants came from Spain. And it was a lot easier for Stearns to buy land in LA under a Spanish land grant if he used his father-in-law's connection and name, Bandini. Because a lot of people don't realize that, how now we have this big political movement to separate California to North and South? People don't realize that the first one of those was done was one of the past Spanish governors of California, Pico Rivera, who a lot of things in LA are named after. He actually put forth legislation that went to the US Congress in the 1850s to do that. But because of the impending coming of the Civil War, it was all quashed. But California could have been divided way back in the 1850s. Everything from Santa Barbara South.
Interesting. Who else has a question? By the way, Charlie, and many will remember Casa de Bandini when it was an old town for many years.
Yes.
Very successful Mexican restaurant that my family loved to go there, and we were sorry that they lost their lease and whatnot. They still exist. The
Yes.
operator of that, whose name is Diane Powers, was a very successful entrepreneur and moved that restaurant up to Carlsbad. And we still go up there. It's a 30-mile trip, but it's great Mexican food.
Yep. And you got to realize the historic thing is when Bandini owned the site that's there now, okay, was actually the site of the Bandini household. When the Bandinis moved north, they sold it to a new developer. And he's the one who added the second story and made the hotel. Because originally it was just a one-story hacienda. And that's the same guy who set up the stables right there in Old Town, because he brought in the stagecoach and he bought the house and added the hotel so he could handle the passengers on the old Butterfield stage.
That's great. All right, who else? If you haven't heard Charlie, he has about 1,000 different stories, and I don't know how he keeps them all in his head. He's got some weird connections up there, I guess, but really a great speaker, and we really appreciate it. Anybody else have any questions for Charlie? Well, Charlie, thank you again. We really appreciate it, and we'll look forward to having you next year with more great stories. Thank you very much, Charlie.
Okay, thank you.
And that concludes our general member meeting for August of this year. So you're welcome to stay around and socialize. Jim will keep the site open for a while, but this meeting is now adjourned. See you next month.